Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Jutit. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. Check out these monitors. These are feeds coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center from all of our stations and affiliates around the country. If it's happening out there, we're going to bring it to you live right here. Studio 55, let's begin. Colombia bows to pressure from the Trump administration, opting not to engage in a trade war over the president's deportation flights and immigration crackdown. We'll look at other countries that could soon play a part in all of this. Plus, on this day, 80 years ago, the Nazi concentration camp Auschwitz was liberated. We're live in Poland for the solemn ceremony as survivors share their stories with world leaders. And rain is offering some relief to wildfires in California, but now there's a threat of flooding and potential mudslides. More on the forecast and the relief efforts out west just ahead. This is CBS News 24/7. A potential trade war between Colombia and the United States is averted over the weekend. President Trump had threatened to impose tariffs against Colombia after that country originally refused to accept flights carrying deported migrants. Colombia has now reversed course and is accepting those flights. I want to bring in CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez for more on this. So just so people understand, Camilo, why did Colombia initially refuse to accept these flights, given that they had accepted some 500 flights over the last couple of years?
Well, Vlad, this incident really underscores and illustrates how aggressively the Trump administration is willing to really go to implement its crackdown on illegal immigration and the immigration system across the board. We do know, obviously, to level set here, that Colombia has been accepting U.S. deportations for years, including under the Biden administration. However, they were usually conducted on civilian aircraft. And the Trump administration over the weekend, Vlad, tried to carry out 2 deportation flights to Colombia, to Bogota, the capital, on 2 military aircraft. That is part of that broader effort by the Trump administration to increase the role that the military plays in border and immigration enforcement. In addition to deploying troops, the administration is also using military aircraft like C-17s to deport people to countries like Guatemala. They tried to do the same with Colombia, but the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, Vlad, said that he objected to the use of military planes because he believed that signaled that migrants were being treated as criminals and delinquents, and that was not a dignified and humane process for migrants. So initially, after accepting the flights, the government of Colombia rejected them. But obviously, following that, the president here, President Trump, threatened punishing and swift sanctions on Colombia, including tariffs and visa limits. And after that, obviously, the Colombian government now has fully agreed to accept deportation flights, we are told, including a military aircraft. So this really does illustrate how much of a focus this issue will be for the Trump administration on the foreign affairs stage, Vlad.
Camilo, we're also learning that the administration is developing an asylum agreement with El Salvador that would allow the U.S. to deport migrants to the country, even if they're not from there. Tell me about that.
That's right. We have exclusively learned here at CBS News, Vlad, that the Trump administration is working on developing an asylum agreement with the country of El Salvador to be able to send non-Salvadorian migrants to that small Central American country. This would be called a Safe Third Country Asylum Agreement, and it would empower U.S. immigration officials, including at the U.S.-Mexico border, Vlad, to essentially block people from seeking asylum in the U.S. and instead instruct them to seek asylum in El Salvador, which would be designated a safe third country for asylum seekers. Importantly, we are told that one plan under internal consideration, Vlad, would allow the U.S. to deport Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang members, suspected gang members from Venezuela to El Salvador, and have that country incarcerate them there in that Central American country. And so this would be a pretty significant development as Venezuela right now, Vlad, rejects U.S. deportation. So it would be a way for the Trump administration to address that migrant population that right now cannot be deported to their own home country. But obviously this could face legal challenges from pro-immigrant advocates.
Camilo, we know that there have been, yesterday alone, some nearly 1,000 arrests of migrants, undocumented migrants in the United States, which is significantly up from previous days. The president and the administration say that they're going after violent criminals, people who have broken the law excessively. How does our reporting bear witness to that. Are they accurate in suggesting that, you're not seeing people who are law-abiding, moms and children, or are they really what the administration is saying, which is these violent criminal offenders, at least initially?
Well, Vlad, the Trump administration is laying the groundwork to oversee what the president has promised will be the largest deportation effort in American history. But to answer your question directly, it is really important to underscore that Immigration and Customs Enforcement right now is still mainly targeting undocumented immigrants who also have criminal convictions or charges and who are deemed to pose a threat to public safety or national security, just like under the Biden administration. However, the big change now, Vlad, is that the ICE agents right now who are going on these operations are no longer prohibited from arresting other non-criminal migrants who are in the country illegally, but who lack criminal records during these operations. So, for example, if they target an undocumented immigrant who has a criminal record, but they also find that that person is living with somebody who is also in the country illegally, but who is not a criminal, that second person can also be arrested now. That is a seismic shift from Biden administration policy, Vlad, that generally limited immigration enforcement to serious criminals and national security threats.
Very interesting. All right, Camila Montoya Galvez for us this morning. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vlad. Okay,
let's bring in CBS News White House producer and reporter Olivia Rinaldi, who is live in Miami and joins us now. Olivia, as you know, Vice President J.D. Vance sat down with CBS Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan this weekend to talk about another big campaign trail promise, which was inflation. What is the vice president saying about the push to bring down prices for everyday Americans?
Yeah, good morning, Vlad. Good to be with you. Margaret Brennan sat down with Vice President J.D. Vance for that exclusive interview on Face the Nation, where she asked whether or not Americans are going to see some of those high prices come down anytime soon. Take a listen to what he had to say about that here in this clip.
There have been a number of executive orders that have caused already jobs to start coming back into our country, which is a core part of lowering prices. More capital investment, more job creation in our economy is one of the things that's going to drive down prices for all consumers, but also raise wages so that people can afford to buy the things that they need.
Now, obviously, we've seen the Trump administration's focus over the last several days of, well, the first days really of his administration have been largely focused on immigration. But there you hear Vice President Vance saying they will be focusing on the economy, raising wages, bringing down prices. But this still comes at a point where Americans are seeing some of that sticker shock in grocery stores, particularly with the high prices of eggs. So important to note there is we'll be tracking throughout these next 100 days in office what are the actions they are taking to make sure that Americans are seeing some of that relief in grocery stores, in commercial stores, things of that sort, Vlad.
Let me ask you about this, Olivia. Lawmakers are expected to be meeting with the president today for their annual policy retreat in Florida. That's why you're there in Miami. What's topping the agenda?
Yeah, we're here in Miami where House Republicans will be meeting with President Trump at his property over in Doral. We're told that the conversation there will largely be about the legislative agenda that the Republicans are going to try to push through in Congress. Now, these are House Republicans that are meeting, and it's important to note they have a very slim majority in the House right now. So Republicans really need to be in lockstep to decide what the agenda and policy that they're going to put forth looks like, and whether or not they're agreed upon of what that looks like. And we know Trump will be there talking about some of the things he's interested in getting passed through. Something he talked about even this weekend was his no tax on tips policy. That's something he came up with in June on the campaign trail. And now he would really like to see that pushed through as some of these tax policies, as his Trump tax cuts, which were passed back in 2017, are up this year. So tax policy, expecting that to be a big focus today here in Doral, Florida.
The other thing, Olivia, that I want to ask you about is a White House official now confirming that the president is preparing to sign 3 new executive orders this week tied to the military. What do we know about that?
Yeah, this just coming in, 3 new executive orders that Trump is going to be signing, expecting to be signed. They're all related to the military in some form or another. The first executive order being related to transgender service of transgender persons in the military. Now, I do want to note that this would direct the Department of Defense to determine a policy regarding transgender service in the military based on readiness. This wouldn't be a blanket ban like it was in the first administration. The second executive order would ban the use of DEI policy in the Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the armed forces. So really abolishing DEI policy in those departments, something we've seen that Trump's been focusing on for the last several days, his first days in office. And the third would reinstate members of the military who were discharged for refusing the COVID vaccine back when that was rolled out in 2021, 2022. There were about 8,000 service members who were involuntarily discharged for refusing that vaccine. So very notable there that Trump is choosing to reinstate those service members should they choose to return to service, Vlad.
Yeah, important distinction there. Olivia Rinaldi for us this morning from Miami. Olivia, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, it's been nearly a week since President Donald Trump signed an executive order calling for the end of federal diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. You just heard Olivia talking about that, and placed DEI supporting employees on paid leave. Earlier on CBS Morning News, Virginia Democratic Congressman Suhas Subramaniam discussed this action.
Over and over again last year during the campaign, we talked about Project 2025. I talked about it all the time. A lot of voters didn't believe it. They didn't believe that Trump would go this far. They didn't believe that Trump would do these things. Now he's doing it. And now we know that Project 2025 was, in fact, his agenda, and he's implementing it as we speak. And so, I think maybe on the Democratic side, long term, we have to look at how we can message better and make sure voters believe what Trump says. But certainly this is, he won because costs were high, and he won for a lot of other reasons, but he didn't win to gut government and put his cronies in place and make it less efficient and less accountable.
Already, DEI information has been removed from federal websites, including the Office of Personnel Management, State Department, and Department of Homeland Security. As part of the president's America First agenda, Trump's newly minted Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, suspended almost all U.S. aid to foreign nations. The only exceptions appear to be Egypt and Israel. It's unclear what this means for Ukraine. The pause is part of a government-wide review. We're also following developments out of Gaza, where tens of thousands of Palestinians are returning to northern parts of the enclave this morning. The move comes after a dispute between Israel and Hamas over the release of a female civilian hostage was ultimately resolved. Ramy Inocencio joins us now to discuss this from Tel Aviv. So, Ramy, good to see you this morning, my friend. What's happening in Gaza this morning? I mean, in your piece earlier on CBS Mornings, we saw thousands of Gazans streaming home, sort of a reverse exodus back to their homelands. The question, Gail King turned to me and said, but what are they returning to, given the level of destruction that we've seen? What can you tell us about that?
Right. The short answer is mostly rubble is what they're returning to, because we know that the IDF has been focused on northern Gaza in order to try to, in its own words, destroy Hamas. And we might not really even be talking about the return of those hundreds of thousands of Gazans back to their homes right now if it really weren't for a breakthrough you mentioned last night, which was mediated by the Qataris. Essentially, Israel had accused Hamas of violating the ceasefire deal over the weekend, basically of not turning over a list of living hostages, and then also not turning over one single Israeli woman, 29-year-old Arbel Yehud. She's believed to be the last female civilian still alive in Gaza. Because of that, Israel didn't open checkpoints along the corridor. This is the Netzarim corridor. For 2 days, Gazans we were seeing were amassing. They got stuck with what little belongings they had, but the Qataris stepped in overnight, resolved all this, and that's why we're seeing this movement, really massively breathtaking, of all these Gazans making their way up the Mediterranean coast, back home, or, to your first question, really back to what's left of their home.
One of the things that I think people here are struggling to understand, Ramy, and it is common when you haven't been following the situation between the Israelis and the Palestinians for many years, as you have, but it's the number of Palestinian prisoners that are being released in relation to the number of hostages being released. I know people have asked me, well, you get, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 hostages being released, and you get 200, 300, 400 Palestinian prisoners being released. Can you explain that for our audience?
Sure. Well, Israeli government officials have said publicly many times that Israel is willing to pay, quote, a heavy price. That has been the buzz phrase over the past few weeks, if not longer, really to try to psychologically get Israelis ready for this ratio that you talk about. 1 to 30 if it is for an Israeli civilian. And as we're seeing in this most recent hostage release, hostage swap, it is 1 to 50. So we will expect that these differences in numbers to be carrying on. In total, there's an estimated 11,000 Palestinians in Israeli jails. Many of them have been charged with anything from murder to suspected support of terrorism, but some things that some people might say as menial as throwing rocks, throwing stones at Israeli defense forces. But looking ahead, we do expect that this will still be this continued disproportionate ratio, if you will. But again, Israel's saying that they're willing to pay a heavy price. And just moments ago, I do want to add that an Israeli government spokesman confirmed that 25 of the 33 hostages in this current phase one of 2, potentially of 3, are alive. That's after Hamas handed over a list which Israel has been going over. We heard early reports, but now we do have official confirmation from the Prime Minister's office.
That is good news. Ramy Inocencio reporting to us this morning from Tel Aviv. Thank you, Ramy. Today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and right now in Poland, world leaders are hearing harrowing stories from survivors of the Auschwitz death camp. We're going to take you there next. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Today is Holocaust Remembrance Day, and it marks 80 years since the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp. German Nazis murdered approximately 1.1 million people at that camp from 1940 to 1945. CBS News reporter Anna Norskevich is live from Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration and extermination camp in former Nazi-occupied Poland, and she joins me now to talk about this. So, Anna, just break down what's been happening there this morning. You're hearing from survivors, and they are sharing their stories with folks there who are in political leadership.
Hi, Vlad. Today, the world pauses to commemorate 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, which is the epicenter of the Holocaust. 1.1 million killed, Jews, Poles, Roma, prisoners of war, and everyone who was deemed undesirable by the Germans, the Nazi Germans. And today, this event is really all about the last remaining Holocaust survivors. Many political leaders from all over the world, from 60 nations, arrived in Poland today. But it's not about them. It is not about politics today. Today, it's about history and memory. Right now, the event takes place. It started 20 minutes ago, and we're hearing from survivors, the last remaining survivors, and it's all about them and the people who are helping them to preserve their memories.
So, Anna, as you know, there's been a sharp increase in anti-Semitism all around the world, including here in the United States. What has been the response from those world leaders who are attending this very solemn ceremony? Because it's not just about remembering the past, as you know, it's also about confronting the past to make sure that it never happens again.
Exactly, and this event is not only a commemoration, but also a call for action to fight against anti-Semitism, to fight against historical distortion, to fight against Holocaust denial. And everyone is very clear about this, that the memory must live on, and as long as some last remaining survivors are still alive, we need to listen to their stories, we need to spread their stories, we need to share their stories, and we need to enable people to be able to share the stories and to fight against historical distortion. So even though the stage today is not a stage for political leaders, but for the survivors here, leading up to the event today and to the commemoration, many leaders made clear statements about never forgetting what happened here at the epicenter of the Holocaust.
And it's important, Anna, as you say, because we've seen not just a sharp rise in anti-Semitism across the world, but we've also seen the rise of far-right political parties in Europe. And the question or the point has to be made that even though we're marking 80 years since the liberation of these death camps, for the people that survived them, it is living history. We are not that far removed. It may seem like ancient history, but in fact, with those survivors there, sharing their stories, with their descendants there, holding on to the memories of not only their loved ones who survived, but those who did not, it is living history.
Exactly, and especially with the far right in Europe on the rise, with populist parties on the rise, often many saying that it is time to move on, it is time to forget history. It is very important for the leaders who are here today, who are talking to the survivors, who are talking to the families of survivors. They are telling them, we will do our best to make the memory live on so that people do not forget what atrocity happened here at Auschwitz-Birkenau.
All right, CBS News' Anna Norskevich for us this morning on a very solemn occasion. Thank you very much, Anna. Appreciate it. Okay, Belarus's President Alexander Lukashenko extended his 30-year rule in an election rejected by opposition leaders and the European Union. The Russian ally was declared the winner, although he faced no serious challenge from the 4 other candidates. Western powers say the vote was neither free nor fair because all leading opposition figures had either been jailed or forced to flee abroad. The Kremlin, of course, celebrated the election and dismissed Western criticism of the vote. Meanwhile, over in East Asia, South Korea's impeached president Yoon Suk-yeol is the first leader to be indicted over his short-lived declaration of martial law last year. Yoon faces rebellion charges that can carry the death penalty or life in prison. Hearings related to the case are expected to last around 6 months. All right, an AI startup is making a new bid for TikTok, and it's offering the federal government a share. Details next. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following this morning. Perplexity AI is making a bid for TikTok ownership. The new proposal calls for the artificial intelligence company to merge with TikTok's U.S. business. The deal would give the federal government the chance to own up to 50% of that new entity. Under the proposal, TikTok owner ByteDance would not have to completely divest from the app, but the U.S. would have full board control. Perplexity is one of several investors expressing interest in TikTok. President Trump said he anticipates a deal in as soon as 30 days. A special legislative session kicks off today in Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis is calling for lawmakers to take up several proposals to help boost the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. But several Republican leaders are pushing back, calling the move, quote, premature, and saying the governor's proposals are lacking substance. A report from the CIA suggests the agency believes that the virus behind the COVID-19 pandemic could have originated in a Chinese lab, but it has low confidence in the assessment. A CIA spokesperson said the lab leak theory is more likely than the natural origin theory, but the agency will continue to evaluate both possibilities. Multiple federal agencies conducted targeted immigration enforcement operations in Chicago as part of the Trump administration's crackdown on immigration. CBS News has confirmed with multiple sources that the agents had active warrants to carry out those arrests. I want to bring in CBS News Chicago reporter Azael Reze for the latest. Good to see you this morning. Can you give us a sense of the scale of the operations?
Yeah, Vlad, so we know agents have been in communities in different parts of the city here. Right now, it's not clear how many people they've arrested. We know those arrests began yesterday on Sunday morning before dawn and went into the late morning hours. Not clear how many people they arrested, their identities, or the crimes that they're accused of. We just know that President Donald Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, was on the ground here with agents from ICE, from Border Patrol, from the ATF, from the DEA, and also U.S. Marshals. So you can imagine with that type of presence, it's a large operation here, and we know they plan to be here over the next few days.
So, Sal, can you break down how the Trump administration or officials are reacting to this operation.
Yeah, Vlad, we know the borders are. Tom Homan has said that they're targeting people who are a public safety threat, a national safety threat right now. We haven't seen much reaction from them other than the fact that they've made it very clear what their mission is, and that is to detain people who are undocumented, people who have active warrants right now. And we've reached out to ICE this morning, Vlad, to see if they've made more arrests. All we know is that they plan to be here the next few days. The latest reactions we have gotten from Tom Homan are that he plans to continue this mission. They're determined to come to sanctuary cities like here in Chicago to make those arrests. And we know, as you mentioned, they did have warrants for the arrests that they made so far, and we're waiting to hear back on exactly what crimes those people that were arrested are accused of right now. Again, still waiting to hear back this morning, Vlad.
And Asal, finally, what are you hearing from just members of the community about how they feel around these arrests?
Yeah, Vlad, you can imagine there's a lot of anxiety and fear in the many immigrant communities we have here in Chicago, a lot of them on high alert, especially in the last week as we started to get news that immigration enforcement agents were going to be here in the city. And now that we've actually confirmed that they've been here in neighborhoods across the city, that fear and anxiety just continuing to rise. We have local officials, local leaders, activists that are working hand in hand, and they're spending all day, most of the mornings here in these neighborhoods trying to spread information and resources. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson has put out a statement over the last 24 hours saying that it's really imperative that all Chicagoans know their constitutional rights, really something we're hearing an echo from so many local leaders, as many immigrant communities and many people here in the city are still afraid. As we know, ICE agents are here and plan to continue arrests over the next few days, Vlad.
All right, Asal Razaya reporting for us from Chicago this morning. Asal, thank you very much. It's going to be a busy week on Capitol Hill as more of President Trump's administration picks face confirmation hearings, and this week's roster of nominees are up for some of the highest profile positions the White House has to offer: the FBI Director, Health and Human Services Secretary, and Director of National Intelligence. I want to bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns to discuss. Caitlin, good to see you. These three high-profile positions are incredibly important. What are we expecting to hear from lawmakers when they sit down to possibly confirm the folks this week? Have they had opportunities to meet with them, for example?
Yeah, good to see you, Vlad. Yes, they've had lots of meetings up here on Capitol Hill, and these are some of the most high-profile names that we are going to see go through these committees. Let's start with Wednesday. We're expected to hear from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the nominee to be HHS Secretary. He's going to sit through two committees, but the Finance Committee is the one that's going to be eventually voting him out or not of committee. And that's going to be, such a focus up here on Capitol Hill for a variety of different reasons. We know his controversial statements about vaccines. There's going to be a lot of questions about that, particularly from the Democratic side of the aisle. But remember, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. himself, of course, was a former Democrat. So we'll see whether there is any crossover support for some of the things that he has proposed regarding other items that the HHS, that he will have under his purview. Another big name coming up here on Capitol Hill, as you mentioned, is Tulsi Gabbard, another former Democrat picked to be Trump's top national security advisor. This is going to be a very controversial one to watch because of her past, history and questions that the security community has about her serving in this role. So we're watching for any crossover support there. But Vlad, what I was really watching was here on Friday night when the Senate very narrowly confirmed Pete Hegseth, and we saw Mitch McConnell, who is no longer in a leadership position, no longer, beholden to the Trump party base, go against his party and vote against Hegseth. And so for some of these other nominees like Gabbard and Kennedy, what does that mean for the confirmation fights ahead? Potentially some more very narrow picks.
Indeed. There are a few other nominees, Caitlin, due back on the Hill this week who've already begun the process. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, well, just tonight, we're expecting the Senate to confirm Scott Bessent, who will be likely, once confirmed, be the Treasury Secretary. And this is an example of a very non-controversial pick. We're expecting him to get some wide bipartisan support, a very, low-key hearing, not a lot of fireworks out of that hearing. This is an example of someone who has drawn bipartisan support, and we're likely to see that tonight. We're also watching for the confirmation of Attorney General pick Pam Bondi. We're also expecting some crossover support for her as well. So as we're kind of comparing to some of these other more controversial nominees who are going through committee hearings this week, expect final votes on some of these others this week.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns for us. Thank you, Caitlin, as always. Intense rain is helping to fight the wildfires in Southern California, but it comes with a flash flood and rock slide warning. Mud flows have already trapped cars and canceled school in burn scar areas, including Malibu and Altadena. We are now going to CBS News correspondent Rob Marciano.
Well, residents and firefighters alike are certainly grateful to finally get some rain here to knock down the fires and the fire risk. But because the hillsides here have been so ravaged by the fire and raked of roots and vegetation, it's very, very fragile. So we see a lot of scenes like this, landslides across this area. This is outside the Palisades fire. There's a burned out home above there. The front yard of that overlooking the ocean, unfortunately, has slammed down onto the Pacific Coast Highway, which is mostly closed here. Fencing, concrete rails, really not doing a whole lot of good. Matter of fact, there was using snow plows to help move some of the mud in spots, at least over to the sides of the road. Over on the other side of the hills here, in Woodland Hills, they had mud encompassing around cars yesterday. They had to pull them out with tow trucks. So the rainfall that we saw here, and still a risk of seeing rainfall today, 0.6 of an inch of rain in LAX. They haven't seen that amount of rain in 10 months. Much higher amounts in some of the hillier areas, and we still have that risk of seeing some showers today, and they could be convective, meaning raining in one spot heavily. So still a high risk of seeing potentially more of these mudslides, kind of getting way too much of a good thing. Rain we so desperately need, doing this sort of thing right here, and that's going to be the risk for the next 12 hours. Beyond that, we go back to a bit of a dry spell here in Southern California. Back to you.
All right, Rob, thank you very much. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the first look at the national forecast. Hey, Grant.
Hey, Vlad. Yeah, you need the roots from all those trees and the bushes that have all burned to absorb all that water. Otherwise, it just runs off and produces all those mudslides there in Southern California. Let me pull up the map here. Let me show you the radar across Southern California this morning, where you're looking down south and you see, I mean, this has not been a sight that we've seen a lot of over the last 6 months or so. So it's not a ton of rain, but like Rob was just talking about, even an inch to an inch and a half of rainfall is really too much for some of that landscape to handle. In fact, some places have gotten close to 2 inches of rainfall over the last couple of days. Let me show you some of these rainfall reports just over the last couple of days across Southern California. Malibu has seen 2 inches of rain. Santa Barbara, about 1 inch and 3/4. Goleta, about 1 inch and 3/4 as well. The Santa Monica Pier, just about 1.38 inches. So there's been a fair amount of rainfall, especially when you talk about that it has been bone dry through the last 3 to 6 months. There's the radar with that upper level low continuing to bring the rain and the high elevation snow to Southern California. That will transition to the east into portions of Arizona as we go into the middle of the week. Meanwhile, we're also tracking some rain across the southeast. We were tracking snow not too long ago, but now the temperature is much warmer, tracking some pockets of heavy rain now moving through portions of southern Alabama into the panhandle of Florida. We do have snow. It's just tracking kind of where you more expect it to be, and that's out of the northern tier states, out of Canada. A couple of clipper systems are going to bring snow and very gusty conditions over the next couple of days. Snowfall totals could be in excess of 6 to 8 inches, if not closer to a foot, especially downwind of some of the lakes there as we go through the middle of the week. These clipper systems will move through, giving way to more mild conditions as we head through the second half of the week. But meanwhile, chilly for now across the midsection of the U.S. up into the northeast, with those windy snow clipper systems moving in out of Canada over the next couple of days. Vlad, back to you.
All right, Grant, thank you very much. The Chiefs are officially on three-peat watch. They'll take on the Eagles in Super Bowl 59. We're following all the fan reaction and anticipation of the game that's coming up next. You're watching CBS News 24/7. A familiar match will headline Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans in just 2 weeks. Both the Philly Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs punched their ticket to the big game after winning their respective conference championship titles. When the two teams faced off in Super Bowl 57 2 years ago, the Chiefs came out on top, and their fans remain pretty confident.
This team always makes me suffer, but they always win. Always winning. Always worth it. Always worth it.
I want to bring in CBS News Philadelphia reporter Nikki Dementri, who's joining us now from inside the Eagles Pro Store. Nikki, good to see you. How are Philly fans reacting to the big win, and what's the merchandise doing on the shelves?
Vlad, everybody here in Philadelphia is happy. They're screaming, "Go Birds." As they're walking into the pro shop right now, we have two people that are giving high fives. They're screaming, "Go Birds." Energy is high here right now. And when I talk with fans, not just yesterday, but today, "Go Birds." See, there you go, "Go Birds." That's what we say instead of hi and bye here. That being said, when you talk to fans, they are looking at this game as a revenge game. They are ready to take on the Chiefs and bring home a win to Philadelphia. And the celebrations continued all throughout last night. It's still celebrating today. Actually, you wouldn't tell if you go down Broad Street because it's all cleaned up. But you saw people, you hear about Philadelphia, you hear people climbing poles. You see that a lot of people are reading Inner Excellence with A.J. Brown. There's just a lot of excitement here, and you can see a lot of people are here buying their merchandise, not just heading into the Super Bowl and the Super Bowl merchandise, but also just getting and gearing up on the Kelly Green and anything and everything they may need for our trip to New Orleans.
We had on Kiana Martin from CBS Sports HQ on CBS Mornings earlier, Nikki, and she told us that the X factor, which is different from Super Bowl 57, is Saquon Barkley. What are you hearing from fans about Saquon?
Oh, we love Saquon here. And Saquon came home. He is from the Lehigh Valley. He went to Whitehall, Penn State. There's so many Pennsylvania ties. People are just happy to have him here, have him home, and to see him really just light up this season, game after game. You saw it yesterday. He played incredible. He was helping his teammates, obviously, as well. Saquon is definitely a deciding factor here. But if you talk to Saquon, you talk to other players on this team, they say this is a team sport, and everybody is helping everybody out there.
All right. Nikki, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And for all the Swifties out there, the answer is yes. Taylor Swift was at the Kansas City Buffalo games last night. She and her boyfriend, Travis Kelce, celebrated together after the big win. It's still up in the air if she'll be at the Super Bowl, but with the Eras Tour finally over, it's looking like a strong possibility. All right, much more news ahead. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. The California wildfires this month have left the future of the thriving and historic Black community of Altadena in doubt. One extended family of musicians lost almost everything. They owned dozens of homes, but just 2 of those survived. CBS News correspondent Elise Preston shows us the impact of their losses.
They're here for healing. The Eaton fire took nearly everything from the Ben family. With no homes, no church of their own, they found harmony at this service. A staggering loss for the extended family. At least 20 homes gone, and the generational wealth they fought to build. You can feel Oscar and Lauren Ben's hearts break, recalling the moment generations of their family's history was erased.
There's nothing to dig from the rubble. So I'm grateful that we have our lives.
Oscar was at home in Altadena, recovering from an illness, when his daughter Lauren called from Massachusetts, urging her family to flee.
The fire's coming up like it has knives. You can hear it. You can hear it shattering glass.
His granddaughter Treasure is 4.
The volcano was trying to put fire in the whole city.
The volcano put fire to the whole city.
Yeah, all my stuff is gone.
But it's not just stuff. These ashes blanket the land 6 generations have called home.
Things that remind us of our current, past, Those keep us human. That being gone feels inhuman.
Like many, the Bens migrated from the Jim Crow South decades ago. Oscar's mother, Marie, married the man of her dreams and stayed to raise their family.
Why Altadena?
You didn't have to worry about them not being served if they went into a restaurant.
The 85-year-old is now separated an hour away.
I miss my great-grandchildren.
Unlike many cities across the country where Black families were blocked from buying property, Altadena was a safe haven.
It is amazing what you all were able to accomplish. There's so many people who look like us who could not buy homes at that time.
In fact, my name was on a few of them.
Flames destroyed all 3 of the homes the matriarch owned and where music took root.
You lost your instruments.
Every one of my instruments.
The music, that is integral to our growth. Just as important as anything else, our lifeblood.
Lauren and her sister Angela are scrambling to find a long-term rental. They're crammed into an Airbnb while the grandmother's insurance claims get settled.
I cried this morning before we went to go look at the other house. We just have to stay strong, be diligent, and continue to love one another.
A love they say they will lean on as they rebuild.
There's no plan to sell. Absolutely not.
If Altadena changes, will you walk away from the land that's been in your family?
No. No. We've earned that land, and our grandmother has done an incredible job of managing a legacy.
And so the rubble did not bury their resilience. The fire did not silence their voices.
All right, breaking news. An earthquake was reported in the Boston area. The 3.9 magnitude tremor happened about 30 minutes ago, which would have been just after 10 a.m. Eastern. It was revised down from 4.1, though some folks reported feeling their homes shaking. The center of the quake was apparently in York Harbor, Maine, and it could be felt as far away as New Hampshire and even the state of Rhode Island. That's according to the U.S. Geological Survey. So far, no report of any major damage, which is good news. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the final look at the national forecast. Hey, Grant.
Hey, Vlad, just looking at that earthquake up there in New England, and yeah, you know, a high-end 3.8, 3.9 earthquake there, about 55 miles northeast of Boston. You start to feel these earthquakes there around a 3.0. So some light to moderate shaking may be possible in some places. Some people in Boston also reported feeling that relatively weak earthquake. Meanwhile, we've got rain in Southern California, much needed rain, but it is producing the concern for some mudslides. This rain will move east along with the high elevation snow over the next 24 hours. Meanwhile, across the rest of the country, we're also tracking a non-winter storm, or system at least, moving across the southeast this morning. That will move through Georgia and then off the coast of the southeast as we go through the rest of the day today. Trailing behind it will be some chilly temperatures. Dallas at 54 today, St. Louis at 45 degrees. Not that Arctic cold that we had last week. Meanwhile, a series of clipper systems will be moving through the Midwestern states, really through the Great Lakes states out of Canada into the north and east. It will bring breezy conditions along with several rounds of snow. Some places, especially downwind of the lakes, could pick up between 6 to 8 inches of snow as we make our way through the second half of the day tomorrow into Wednesday. Meanwhile, I mentioned the rain and the snow across the desert southwest down into Southern California. We're also working with dry and seasonable conditions from San Francisco up into the Pacific Northwest, with places like Seattle looking at high temperatures today around 46 degrees. Vlad, back over to you.
All right, Grant, thank you very much. We'll talk to you tomorrow. That does it for me, folks, but stay right where you are. After the break, Elizabeth Cook is live from San Francisco with all the breaking news coast to coast. This is CBS News 24/7.